Alaikum Hamza Sahib.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. How's everything, dear brother?
Very good, dear brother. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
Good. We'll just get started in about a minute or two. We'll
Okay.
just wait for the president to come online again.
Okay.
Okay, so without further ado, we will start. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Welcome everyone to day 2 of AMSA Freshers Week. Today's topic is Did you look in my journey to the true Islam? And this will be led by respected Hamza Ilyas Sahib. First of all, we're going to go to Yusuf Saab, who is the president of AMSA UK, and he will give a brief introduction as to who we are, what we do. So yeah, if I can hand it over to Yusuf Saab.
Before we get started, I could just request Hamza Ilyas Sahib to lead us in silent prayer. Jazakallah.
Ameen.
Jazakallah. And before I hand over back to Hamza Ilyas Sahib to lead us in today's discussion, I would just like to say Jazakallah to everyone who's taken the time to join this call. And Jazakallah to Hamza Sahib, who has taken time out of his busy schedule to be here to discuss his inspiring story with us. This is part of the AMSA Freshers Week that is going on. And AMSA, as a society, is the Ahmadiyya Muslim Student Association. And the role of AMSA and Jamaat is essentially to support students both in their spiritual needs and in their social needs throughout their time at university. We're fortunate that we now have 23 different universities in the UK that have an AMSA set up. And this is increasing every year as MD students increase in numbers across the UK. To any students who are on the call today and might be starting university or currently in university, we encourage you to get involved with AMSA and meet your MD brothers. AMSA does a lot of activities throughout the year, and especially during this time of the coronavirus period, we've been doing a lot of online things for students. And we aim to do events that students enjoy and students benefit from. I will put my email in the chat as well for you to refer back to. But if any students are having any problems or want to discuss anything regarding university, or want to know who to contact in their university if they want to get involved with AMSA, you can just email me and we can take a discussion further. So Jazakallah, and I'll hand over back to Ibrahim Saab. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.
So yes, as Yusuf Saab said, thank you everyone for joining this call, and thank you again to Hamza Saab for taking time out for this session. So just to quickly introduce Hamza Saab to everyone, Hamza Saab accepted Islam and Ahmadiyyat in 2004. He currently serves as Naib Secretary in the UK Department for New Ahmadis. And he also works in Humanity First UK, serving as the head of research and development. So today's session is going to be Hamza Saab's story as to how he converted and became an Ahmadi. And it's going to be a bit of a discussion. So I will prompt some questions and Hamza Saab can, inshallah, tell us his journey. So we'll get straight into it. And we'll start off with what was life like before Islam Ahmadiyyat? What was your childhood like growing up? What was your family like? And was there any religious background? Were you Christian? Were you a Jew or atheist even?
Wow, we got to cover all this in an hour.
Hopefully we can tackle the main points.
Of course. I'm just messing with you, brother. So for all of you who have not come across my story at some point, I feel like I see it everywhere, but that may be just me. But I grew up pretty much in a Christian background, I guess you can say. My grandmother was a Baptist minister, so she had her own church, United Bible Church of God, Fire Baptized. It's a long name. This is before the time of acronyms, though. And so me, my brother, and my sister, we were more or less the congregation and the choir. So my parents, who lived with us, I was raised by both of my parents and my grandmother who lived with us. They were not so religious, and they more or less left the religious training to my grandmother. And so pretty much was an ardent churchgoer up until about the age of 17 or 18. And as soon as the, sort of the compelling us to go to church eased off a bit, then I stopped going. I believed in God. I always wondered whether or not God still spoke, because we were trained in the Bible um, for the entirety of my childhood. But just like the Sufi circles in the religion of Islam, in Christianity, they have the spiritualists as well, which are more than likely to be found in the Baptist persuasion, if not the Pentecostal as well. So you get a whole lot of people catching the Holy Spirit, falling out on the ground, and all of the things that I would imagine from an Islamic perspective you hear about in Pakistan and India and some other countries, as in Indonesia. These things happened in Christianity as well. But the questions that plagued my mind was, why doesn't God still speak? Because we spent a whole lot of time reading chapter after chapter about prophet after prophet, and listening to the way that God would speak to them. I couldn't wrap my head around that, and the whole 3 in 1, 1 in 3 was quite difficult for me to grasp, and I wasn't really getting sufficient answers from anyone, because it's all about faith. So by the time I hit 17, 18, I drifted away into the welcoming, open arms of my friends, and hanging out, going to nightclubs, and working and this sort of thing. So I was working down on Wall Street. So, and in New York, the city never sleeps. So, during the day you were in the office as a banker, and during the evening, a lot of my friends, I knew all the nightclub owners or the promoters, and so we would just run around from spot to spot, and that continued pretty much all of my 20s. And into the late 30s, or I should say into my late 20s and approaching 30, I specifically recall coming home one night in one of the company cars, and I was looking out at the Hudson River. We were going up this highway on the side of Manhattan. And I was just thinking about all of the people that I had seen. At a lot of these high-end clubs, you got what they call the trust fund babies. You know what I mean? These are people whose parents have a lot of money. And then you have the working class people and at these spots. And so I was just thinking to myself, okay, so, you got the ladies, everyone's drinking, and then you just go home in your car, and then you get up the next morning and do it all over. And I was thinking to myself, like, there's got to be more to life than just this, just like eating, drinking, and like working, making money. There's always somebody who has more money than you, and there's obviously always somebody who's less wealthy than you, someone better looking than you. I mean, the list goes on and on. Now, just so happened, unfortunately, the September 11th happened, and a lot of people were laid off. I was among them, and couldn't find a job anywhere. And I recall one day I went out to South Street Seaport. This is like your Canary Wharf. And I was looking out at the water, and I remember saying, God, if you give me a job, I'll do whatever you want me to do. I was struggling, ducking my landlord, the whole nine. And all that I used to enjoy beforehand failed me. was nothing. Just gone, just like that. So it just so happened that that prayer was accepted, because 2 weeks later, I got a call from one of the banks I had previously worked for saying, oh, we want you to look after this section of the Upper West Side, some of the banks out there, the branches out there. So I forgot about, my promise, and I went right back to my good old bag, And but the interesting thing is, I remember becoming increasingly dissatisfied with my life and my lifestyle. And I started thinking to myself, I need to be morally a better person. And so I started trying to read more and so forth and so on. And then my Laylatul Qadr happened. One day I walked into my office and I heard some of the staff saying something about this restaurant that was not too far from my office. And I don't know why I was intrigued. Normally I just walk past them, good morning, went right into my office and I stayed there and did my thing. But on that day I stopped and I said, what are y'all talking about? So they mentioned this restaurant. And I said, yeah, I know that restaurant. It's on my way home. I normally walk that way. Why don't I stop by there and give the owners a visit? So, which I did. So it turns out the owners were from Yemen, right? These Arab Muslims. And we tackled our business. And right after that, they offered me something to drink, juice. And so I said, yeah, I'll stay for a few minutes. So I sat down and we made small talk. And I mentioned to them, the interesting thing about I'm assuming you guys are Muslim. I was a Black nationalist at that time. So I was, Black Lives Matter and all that, but 2004. And I said, the interesting thing about you guys' religion is that, for us as Christians, we'll preach it on Sunday, but we ain't dying for it on no day. I don't agree with the bombing of women and children, but this whole, certainty that Islam gives you guys is quite admirable. So they said, yeah, it's because of our book. And so I said, what does that mean? They said, yeah, it's, God dictated it. I said, oh, no, you mean somebody, was feeling like a good person, was feeling good about God, and they felt inspired. They said, no, God dictated it himself. I said, well, I've never heard of this. They said, it's the most famous book in the world. I said, well, again, I've never heard of it. They said, well, that's on you. I said, okay, fair point. We became friends, and I used to stop by there after work, and we would talk about Islam. And the more I listened to them, the more I became intrigued about this book, the Quran. And one morning, I had a dream, and I wasn't the type to dream. That wasn't my thing. Any dreams I had were not worth repeating. But one night I did have this dream that I was back at my parents' home. My father passed away when I was only 22. So this is about 8 years later. And I had this dream that I had gone down into the basement of my parents' home and opened up a box. And there was a book called the Quran. And right at that moment, I heard the basement door enter, and it was pitch black in the basement where I was. But all of this light came pouring in, right? And so my old Christian thing got the better of me, because as a Christian, when you grow up, they tell you if you see God, you'll die, right? But I heard this voice say, God is coming. So I got scared and I went right back into my, Christian instincts, and I hid behind this pillar. And I could see somebody was walking right down the stairs. I could see from the knees down, and they had on white pants and no shoes. So then I hid behind the pillar thinking to myself, oh, I'm gonna pass out now. Now I'll die. But then curiosity got the better of me again. When I peeked around the pillar, the person was gone, but the door was open and all the light was still coming in, and the dream ended. And the dream was so real that when I woke up, I was shocked to see that I was still in my room and I was nowhere like in the dream. Anyway, about a week or so later, I went to my parents' house, and I went down into the basement because it turned out my mom had stored my father's old books there. And I would go down there from time to time, feeling nostalgic, and just take a look at some of the books that my dad had. And lo and behold, I opened up one of the boxes, and my father had a copy of the Quran. Now, this was shocking, particularly in our household, where it was because my grandmother, as I mentioned, was a Christian minister, no talk of any other religion other than Christianity was happening there. And, they would even slate the non-Baptists, like the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Catholics, etc., not to speak of Islam. So I was quite shocked to see it. So I took it home and started trying to read it. But it was quite confusing because I couldn't get a sense of who was speaking. Whoever was speaking from such a lofty position that I couldn't figure out the pronoun, the we, our, I. And humanity was divided into three groups, the believers, non-believers, and the hypocrites. So it's just quite black and white. And so it took a bit to digest, but it whetted my curiosity even more. So I continued going to see the Arabs, and they would give me books, and then they gave me a Quran. And by that time, I was off to the races. I was gone. I started down in those books left and right. And over in this section of the Bronx where I was living in, there's a big population of Muslims, and then Christians, and then Jehovah's Witnesses. And so I would go around continuously reading these books and then debate with various groups. So no longer was I, running from Jehovah's Witnesses. Whenever any of them stopped me, I'd be like, oh, well, I've got a few moments. And we would sit there and debate and what have you. So then I reached a point, I started trying to visit some of the mosques, and I wasn't quite satisfied with the mosques. They seemed quite dark for some reason, though I'm sure the lighting was fine. But my heart wasn't satisfied. And so one day I had some question that I asked a colleague of mine at work, who I found out later on was an Ahmadi. But I asked him some question. He says, I don't know, but there's another brother who works for our same firm. Maybe he could help you. So so I looked this brother up on the intranet, left him a message, and he called me the next day and invited me over to the mosque. And naturally, he too was an Ahmadi, and they had invited me to the Bait al-Zafar Mosque in Queens. This was like the hub at that time in New York for Ahmadis, the Jami Mosque. So I went there and I met these Ahmadis, and these brothers, they blew me away. The lighting was also fine, but it seemed also very bright in this mosque. And all the brothers, they also seemed bright and cheerful and welcoming and warming. And my visits to that mosque to catch up with this brother happened over maybe a period of a month or two. And one day, when I went there, I saw a picture of the Prophet on the wall, and that blew me away, because just prior to that, I had this dream, whereas I had walked into a room and I saw two men there, one taller and one slightly shorter, and they had white, beautiful beards and large white turbans. And a voice said, "This is Prophet Muhammad." And what was amazing about this is I had read his name in books, but didn't have a connection with him. It's just when you read anyone's name in a book. But that dream, his face, his eyes, crystallized for me. So anyway, the taller man came over to me and put these coins in my pocket. And when I looked down to dig the coins, he reached back in and took one. It was 4 coins in total. He took one and threw it across the room. And when I looked across the room looked like Earth from an airplane. If you ever look down and you're coming in kind of close and you just see fields and fields, and it looks like a green carpet. So this is what the floor looked like. So I went to see where that coin landed because, you know, it looked kind of expensive. So I was just wondering, there's no sense throwing that out, but I couldn't find it. So I came back to them and they just sat there and smiled at me. And forwarding now to me coming into the mosque, into the president's office, and I see the picture of this man and I recognize him. The shorter man turned out to be the promised Messiah, Islam. So right from there, I knew Islam was true. Or I should say, it was true enough to begin to accept it, that this is what I wanted for myself. So just a few more trips, and one morning I woke up and I realized that I couldn't keep going there. I had this clarity in my heart that I needed to go there and do something, though I didn't know what that was. Now, it just so happened that this brother called me up. His name is Ghulam Rabi. He called me up and invited me down to the mosque for the Isha prayer, and I went. And after the Isha prayer, he invited me up to the library. And when I got up there, he's sitting at the table with another elder Ahmadi by the name of Mohsen Mahmood, who passed away a few years ago. And he starts reading off this paper. So I said, well, before, I'm not sure what you're about to get into, but the reason why I came here, because I wanted to find out what I needed to do to be a part of this community. Anyway, he has a personality similar to mine. And so what ended up happening was he and I kept going back and forth, back and forth. He's trying to get me to pay attention to what he's trying to say because he wants to read off this paper. And I'm trying to draw his attention to the fact that I'm only interested in finding out what I needed to do to be a part of this community. Thank you very much. And so he and I go back and forth, and poor Mohsen Mahmood, he's in the middle. He's like, hold on, let him talk. And then that's not having any effect with Ghulam Rabi. So he's saying to me, hold on, just let him talk, because he can see what's happening between the two of us and what we're both trying to do. But we couldn't. Anyway, at one point, I said, look, what's this with this piece of paper? Man, let me get this paper. So I grabbed it from him. I said, what do you need, a signature? Is that it? So I signed it. All right, there you go. What else now? So poor Ghulam Rabi, he's so flustered. He's like, I have to explain it to you. So I said, knock yourself out. So I let the cat rap. And when he finished his thing, you know, we all made prayer, and I felt like, okay, now I've done it. This is what I needed to do. But oddly enough, I continued running around and debating people and this, that, and the third, until one day I came to the mosque during the month of Ramadan. And Imam Inama Kosa, who's now the Amir out in Australia, he was there. He used to invite me over to his house, and we would sit around and I would ask questions, or we would just have, you know, to have a chat. And one day he started talking about all of the various spiritual experiences that Ahmadis across the world have. And when I went home that night, I started thinking to myself, you know, I'm an Ahmadi, but like, I don't have any of these spiritual experiences. In fact, the only little bit of pleasure I get is running around, you know, debating people. But then that made me think further, because over time, I had acquired quite a few of the Promised Messiah Islam's books, and I would read them and study them, and I would go out and I would be bumping these cats off, you know, in debates, no matter who they were. And it made me think, though, like, here I am, I consider myself a Muslim, but I wasn't really praying, though. I'm running around debating people with the little bit of knowledge that I have using this man's books. But now that I think about it, like, he claims to be the second coming of the Messiah. Like, I've been hearing about this since I was a kid, when Jesus comes back. Like, he's claiming to be him. So then for a moment, I got nervous. I said, oh man, I wonder if I rush this. So that didn't feel good, because then I realized, well, I'm also out here debating all these people with his books. So if the books are solid, if his knowledge and information is solid enough for me to run around and debate people, then like, why is it I don't feel confident enough to actually practice Islam, make my prayers and all these things? So when I went back home, before I got in the house, I remember looking up at the sky and I said, oh God, if this man is true, help me understand it, but don't let me be a hypocrite. You know, I don't want to be a fake Muslim. So I went and thought to myself, well, you know what I'll do? I'll start by making these here prayers, starting with that Fajr prayer, that early prayer. So I decided not to go to bed that night. I would just sleep on the couch, you know what I mean? And I had literally put my head down on the couch and I fell through the mattress like Brad Pitt in Snatch. I don't know if y'all ever saw that. That's my movie reference, by the way. Anyway, I sunk into such a deep sleep. And I remember within seconds of me putting my head on the pillow, I saw like a book held out in front of me. And this voice that sounded like, it's very difficult to describe, but like thunder. But if it was thunder, my heart would have been like a tuning fork. You know, it was completely at the mercy of the vibrations of this thunder. And it said, number one, preach. There is none worthy of worship save Allah. Number two, preach. There is none worthy of worship save Allah. And this voice had almost like an Indian accent to it, which was odd. And the other thing that was odd about it was that at that time, at least for me as a Westerner, I didn't really feel like I connected to the word Allah. Whenever I wanted to describe Allah, I would say God. That felt more like I'm referring to the Supreme Being, whereas Allah sounded like a word that I was trying to learn how to use, like Bismillahirrahmanirrahim or Alhamdulillah or Allahu Akbar. It's a foreign language. It wasn't my mother tongue, so I didn't really connect. But this voice, you know, just kept repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. And I was so afraid that I felt like I wasn't sure if I was alive or dead. I just laid there on the couch like a corpse. And so I don't know how long this went on for, but when I finally became aware of myself, I was so afraid I didn't want to open my eyes, but I could still see around my living room. And I didn't even realize that my eyes weren't open until I opened them and realized that I was seeing the same thing. And I was a hysterical mess. I think I called every Ahmadiyya I knew that night. It was about 3:34 in the morning. And I called everybody. And the only one who picked up the phone was Imam Kosa. And these Murabiyan, they get fantastic training because he sat there perfectly relaxed at 3:35 in the morning, listening to me wail and cry like a newborn baby. What does this mean? So anyway, he said, yeah, this is good. This is the kalama. And I continued on until finally he said, Hamza ji, you sound tired. Get some sleep. This cat is so cool. And so I went to bed and on the couch, and I laid there just going over in my head what on earth happened. And it took a few weeks to process it. But ever since then, I had no doubt whatsoever that Islam was true. That finalized any questions around whether or not Islam was true. And I don't mean intellectually, I mean in my heart. Because in all actuality, knowledge is just the possession of information. But like, you can have all the books in the world. If you don't practice any of it, it means nothing. So when I say it made a difference in my heart, I meant like, I did get up for that Fajr prayer, or I should say I stayed up for that Fajr prayer because there was no chance of me going back to sleep after that. But following that, to make a long story longer, following that, the degree of certainty that I had in Islam began to increase, only because, you know, there were many more spiritual experiences and dreams to follow with the promised Messiah and the Khulafa and the Holy Prophet ﷺ. And all of these encouraged me to keep studying, and most importantly, to put into practice that which I was learning. And the most important thing you can learn to put into practice is observing your daily prayers. You know, no relationship survives if there's no communication. It's pointless, right? How many marriages break up? They're like, he won't talk to me, right? It's over. Or if you know, the man's not talking to the woman, or the woman's not talking to the man, once that communication goes, whether you mother and father, husband and wife, brother and sister, the minute the communication goes, that relationship is out the window, is finished. Communication is the lifeblood of any good relationship, especially that of love. It's impossible to love someone and not be in communication with them. So anyway, that certainty is what I needed to begin to put into practice what I had learned. So I stopped debating and everything. I went out and bought every book I could, every Jamaati produced book that I could, and went to my house, because right after that, you know, another bigger bank bought the bank I was working for, and so I was made redundant again. And I was happy. I was thrilled. I couldn't believe that it was my good luck. And I went right into the house, and I did nothing but study all day long. And when I wanted a break from reading, then I used to just listen to the fourth Khalifa in those question and answer sessions on Al-Islam. They used to have the little MP3s at that time, you know, so I'm talking about like 2006, 2007 now. And I was broke, didn't have a job, didn't have a dime to my name. Sometimes I was, you know, eating bread and water, and I was having the time of my life, you know, ducking my landlord, you know what I'm saying? And I would do it all over again, because, you know, it feels like sometimes that was a spiritual high point in my life, you know? And so that pattern then began to repeat itself. So right after that, I was married at the time, and, you know, she got to the point where she came from a very Christian background, and she didn't like, you know, me being a Muslim. And as I think about a year and a half passed, she tolerated it until finally she said, you got to choose Islam or you got to choose me. And I tried to talk her out of it, but, you know, it just didn't work. So called up a friend of mine, got a U-Haul truck, loaded everything back up, went into the house, said, it doesn't have to be like this. Like, I know plenty of people who are, you know, married to Christians or this. And the most important thing is love. But everybody has a different path. So I split, stored all my stuff, and then realized I had no place to live. So I thought, okay, well, this is something. So I started driving a New York City yellow cab, and I would sleep in the cab if I had it for 24 hours, or I would sleep in parks or what have you. It was beautiful making prayer in the park. And it never failed that I saw, you know, Hazur, and he would come and take me by the hand or put his arm around my shoulder, or it was just absolutely brilliant. So this happened for about a year and a half or so. And then finally another bank called me up one day. I'm giving you the short version of it. And they said, we wanted you to look after X area. And I happily said, Alhamdulillah, but it was the same to me, really, driving in the cab or working for a bank. But wherever the blessings lie, Hamza will follow, inshallah. And more or less, that was it. And then I'll just fast forward to about 7 years ago, where I moved here to the UK, which for me, which was the greatest blessing, because All my life I had wanted, when I say life, I mean my life is an Ahmadi, so that means from 2004 to about 2012, I used to fantasize about living here in the UK near Hazur. And when Allah brought together a chain of events that would make that happen, not only were some of the dreams that I had seen years ago that I would live in Europe, not only did they come true, but it reinstilled faith in that saying of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, that Allah does not allow any servant to die until he rewards him with something equal to or greater than that which he has sacrificed. So anyway, I will end it there. I think that's enough, because I can go on and on telling you about some of the interesting things that happen in this journey toward Ahmadiyyat. But one thing I will say is that the journey never ends. It's a journey, and Allah has no fixed position, which means that the journey is forever. Acha. So Ibrahim Saab?
Yes, Jazakallah, Hamza Sahib. Such a great story. I always love hearing convert stories personally. I'm sure everyone really benefited from your journey today. I've got a quick question before we open it up to the floor for questions as well. You said that one of your friends helped you out after you had split from your wife. I want to know, and I'm sure the rest of the people want to know as well, what was the reaction of your friends and family to your conversion to Islam?
I never had a big group of friends. I know some people, they have a large number of associates. In fact, as an Ahmadi now, this is probably one of the few times in my life where I've had such a wide circle of friends. But prior to that, I only had two, the most, you know, because then things get different. Oh, what do you want to eat? I don't know. Let's go here. Let's go there. Just too many psychos. But that's just my opinion. It works for some people. It just never worked for me. But for the few friends, the one or two friends that I had, they thought it was a phase. And that's after they were shocked, because I lived pretty much like any other 20-something Western person, maybe on the extreme side, I guess. I mean, from Brooklyn, lived in the Bronx, and then Manhattan was my playground. So everything that people get into there, that's what we got into. And I was considered probably the worst out of my friends. So they were shocked at first that I even became a religious person, because I was not a religious person at all by any stretch of imagination. I believed that there was a God. And if that was true, he was definitely going to forgive me. This was my outlook, right? So at first they were shocked. And then after that, they thought, okay, well, this is just a phase. He's just checking it out. And then after a while, they were just like, they didn't know what to do. And then there was a natural drift away. Someone wants to go out clubbing and drinking and chasing everybody, and I didn't. So we began to have less in common. But there's still love there. In fact, about 6-7 months ago, when I was in New York for work, I paid him a visit. He's been to Jalsa, he's been to Ijtima, he's been to the mosque, you know what I mean? So that love is what keeps people together, but it's our way of life that keeps us apart. So that's for my friends. In terms of my family, for the most part, they were accepting as well. I think they also thought it was a phase, you know what I mean? Because it was like, all they knew about Islam is what they heard on the newspaper, and in the news and the internet. So you can't blame them, really. Again, it was out of love that they want what's best for their family member. There were some other family members who was another part of my family is a military, comes from a military background. And so I think because of that same misunderstanding, there was some friction at first. Um, but I'm a firm believer that with prayers, people's hearts are softened, because after a while they have love for you and you've got love for them. So when you treat them well and you have love for them and you pray for them, then it may be that Allah will, bring some more Hazrat Umars, you know. So to answer the question, it was tricky at first for some family members, um, and it got better over time.
Jazakallah Hamza Sahib. I asked the question because in many videos that I've watched about converts, it's often the family and the friends which are a huge hurdle. People find that quite difficult. I think I was listening to Ibrahim Noonan Saab, how his dad reacted when he found out he was a Muslim and an Ahmadi. Was quite was quite a drastic situation for him in his own home. So Jazakallah. So
I think in that regard, though, if I may,
of course.
So my grandmother, who I mentioned before, was a Baptist minister. And around the time that I became an Ahmadi, she had fallen poorly. You know what I mean? And so I used to go and visit her. And that first visit was about, she hadn't seen me for about 2 years. And around this time, I think the word had spread and gotten to her because she was, the matriarch of the family. And I think the word had gotten around to her that I had become a Muslim. So I had just gone to visit her because she wasn't well, and her condition was deteriorating. But I suspect I may have been set up by one of my family members, because when I went there, I wasn't there for 5 minutes, and so my grandmother was like, "So I heard you became a Muslim." So I was like, "Oh." Now around that time, I had enjoyment with debating people, but I was not going to get into this conversation with my grandmother. And so I said, "Yes, grandmother." And so she said, "I went to the dentist the other day." Old folks have this way of like approaching things. So I went to the dentist the other day. My dentist, he's a Jew. And so I asked him, did he believe that Jesus was the Son of God? And he told me, no, he thinks he was a good person, but he was just a good teacher. That's it. I said, okay. So she said, do you believe that he was the Son of God? So I'm like, oh my goodness. Had she asked me anything else, right, I would have had some clever response. But that dead on, closed end question, I'm like, and I didn't want to hurt her feelings. This was the woman who raised me, but she asked me such a direct question. So I was in such a quandary. I just started to cry. And it was a blessing because I think it softened her heart a bit. And I said, no, grandmother, I don't believe he's the Son of God. And I know that might seem like a trivial thing for some people, but, my grandmother, we grew up with her. She raised us. And as much as I love debating people, I wasn't about to crush some 87-year-old woman. She spent 40 plus years of her life preaching what she thought was the truth in order to save people. So anyway, when I started to cry, and I'm like 27, 28 at this time, it took the edge right off of her. She gave me a tissue and she was like, do you have a copy of this book? So I said, yeah. Now around that time, because I used to run around debating people, I pulled out a copy of the Quran. I said, but I need to perform ablution first. And she says, no, go ahead. So I made wuzu in the sink, came over, and I really didn't know any verses of the Quran. So I'm trying to think of one of the verses that talks about Christianity and Jesus, right? But I knew even less than I know now about the Quran. So when I opened up the book, she was like, read from right there. I was like, well, I can find something for you. She was like, no, read from right there, wherever it opened up. It's the Lord's work. So I'll never forget chapter 35. And in these verses, it talks about how, and I'm just going to paraphrase, it talks about how no bearer of burden can bear the burden of another. right? Even though that person is your family member. Surely we have sent you with the truth and glad tidings to warn your nearest kinsmen. And then God talks about the seeing and the blind are not the same, nor is the light and the dark or the hot and the cold, right? You can only warn him who fears his Lord in secret. So my grandmother's there, and if y'all know anything about Baptist, she's there sitting on the couch and she's catching the Holy Ghost as I'm talking. Literally, I'm not making jokes here. She's she's catching the Holy Ghost. And once I was done, she said, I always had respect for Muslims. I've always found them to be very righteous people. That which you have read from is definitely from God. I could feel his blessings, his anointment on me. And right after that, we never had a problem. When her condition got worse and they needed to have a DNR, do not revive form, family members gathered and they were trying to get her to sign the form just in case she, passed out. She said she didn't want to be revived, but she didn't want to sign the form. And I just so happened to get there and she's weeping and crying. And I just recited Surah Fatiha to her in like a melodious voice. She calmed right up and she said, tell the doctor to come here. When the doctor came, she says, I'll sign it now. I was shocked. So I hope that gives you some taste of what it was like for me, at least.
Jazakallah. That was a really nice account with you and your grandmother, and yeah, those are some of the hurdles that many of the converts have to face, and your personal experience with your grandmother. So very nice story, Jazakallah. So now we'll open it up to the floor. If anyone on the call has a question, I think you have the ability to raise your hand. And once you raise your hand, I can see that. So I believe by raising your hand, you have to go into participant section. And then you can click as a option to raise your hand. I'll go ahead and then unmute you. And if you want to share your video, you can. If you don't, that's perfectly fine. But then you can ask Hamza Sahib a question. Otherwise, you can also send me questions via the chat. So you can send them to me privately so that I can just read them out to Hamza Sahib anonymously. So there's two ways of going about it. I'll just wait for you guys to send some questions through. And but before I'll start with some questions that we already have from some people. So Hamza Sahib, the first question we have is, I can't imagine what it's like for someone new to join the Ahmadiyya Jamaat. What things would you say might help a newcomer feel welcomed? Perhaps some of the positives that you have experienced yourself.
Think well of people. For me, that's it. Think well of people and try to figure out why you have accepted Islam and Ahmadiyya. I think anytime a person becomes serious about their faith, they tend to judge others too harshly sometimes, because now they're becoming serious, and so they want everyone else to become an exemplar. And that's the reason why anyone has accepted faith, was to become a better person. And so that looks different for a lot of people. For everyone, it looks different. So remember that heaven has many gates. Some will enter through prayer and fasting and charity, and you never know how anyone enters into heaven. So I would say think well and remember the reason why you came into Jamaat Ahmadiyya. That is to say, you entered into Jamaat Ahmadiyya to have a relationship with Allah. Everything else is secondary. Everything else will pass away. So it's about Allah, nothing else. So if you keep that in mind and think well of Allah and think well of people, focus on their goodnesses, you'll be fine. No matter how bad people can be, if you came here for Allah, what difference does it make?
Jazakallah, a really nice answer. And I guess keeping that relationship is stresses the important that we as Ahmadis should be, doing our 5 daily prayers as well, even offering the Tahajjud prayer, being constantly in remembrance of Allah throughout the day. And I guess just like you say, being mindful and respectful to all people, and not feeling like you're above anyone just because who you are. Very nice answer. So we have another question. So Hamza Sahib, after seeing Hazur in your dreams for many years after your conversion, what was your feeling when you personally met Hazur for the first time?
So it wasn't that simple, because later on, the first year that I converted, it just so happened that Hazur had visited Canada for the first time. And so a couple of the Ahmadis decided to drive there from New York, and they invited me, and I went with them. And so there was like a musafa, like a greeting where you just shake Hazur's hand and you keep going. And so I had this brother with me, and when we got up to Hazur, this was now my first time. So I had been an Ahmadi for all of maybe a couple of months. And I didn't quite understand who he was in relation to the community, but, my first impression of him was like he looked like a mountain. He was very awe-inspiring. And he said to me, when someone introduced me to Hazur, he pulled me back and said, "Remain steadfast," and then kept going. So the following year, I think Hazur came back as well, and I went to the Canadian Jalsa. And he said to me, "When I see you in your 3rd year, you will no longer be a new Ahmadi." So it just so happened that in my 3rd year, America decided to send a US delegation to London, and I was among that delegation. So I had seen, to answer your question, I had seen Hazur that first year that I became an Ahmadi, that 2nd year, and in the 3rd year, I met Hazur in London. And my impression was always that he was awe-inspiring. I mean, he was just very awe-inspiring. He always seemed taller and magnificent.
I think Ibrahim Noonan Saab said that when he first saw Hazrat Khalifatul Masih, so the 4th Khalifa, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Radhe, he said that if there's anyone who he ever saw, would be like a prophet, it was him. I don't know if that was similar to your situation.
Yeah, definitely.
That's amazing. So yeah, Jazakallah for sharing that as well. We have lots of questions, so let me just get to the next one. So Assalamu alaikum Hamza Sahib, Jazakallah for that really inspiring talk. My question is regarding the young people wanting to convert but are living in a household which may perhaps be difficult for them to do so. For example, an 18-year-old who still lives under the roof of their parents. What would you say to them?
Faith is a matter of the heart, though. Not to mention, I know a lot of 18-year-olds who've done worse without their parents knowing, and they were a lot more clever about it. So when there's a will, there's a way. That's just my view. If someone wants to accept Islam and they are convinced that this is what they want to do, then yes, there will be some limitation, maybe attending jalsas and things like that. But accepting any faith is the creation of a bond between you and God. So no human can interfere with that, even if they kill you off. So if someone wants to have a relationship with God, in other words, they want to accept a prophet, in other words, they want to accept Ahmadiyyat, who can stop them from doing that? For me, it's just that simple. That was my view concerning it. This looks like it's true. I'm going to have to die, and all of my family and friends will divide up all of my belongings, and it'll just be me and God. So what am I going to do about that?
Jazakallah. Yeah, so I guess it's that spiritual death, that you have to have, almost letting go everything to keep that faith. Is that what you're trying to say essentially, is to have that faith and just have that love of Allah to keep you going through those tough times?
Well, almost kill bird don't make soup. So it is about letting go completely. It is about sacrifice. Again, I know plenty of 16, 17, 18-year-olds old who've done a lot worse sneaking around without their parents or family and friends knowing, meaning that if you really want to do something, you can do it. But this is related to having a relationship with God, right? So like, you got your own room, inshallah. I remember one time, makes me laugh to this day, but I remember one time I was around my wife's family who were against Islam, and we were on our way to a wedding, and I excused myself because it was time for prayer, right? And I didn't want to upset any of the, cause any drama. And I remember I went into the bathroom and offered salat. You know what I mean? So if you want to do it, you can do it. I'm not saying everybody is going to have that degree of drive, but I'm just saying, like, if you want to do it, then, you can do it.
I definitely
It'll help you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. If there's a will, there's a way, and it's that connection with Allah that keeps you going, I guess. So yeah, it's that journey for everyone, and everyone's journey, I guess, is different as well. It will happen at different times, and just keeping that faith and having the confidence, I guess, as well, to be able to do those things is really important. But yeah, Jazakallah, if there's a will, there's a way. So next question. Often when I'm doing tabligh, I find it's quite a challenge to introduce what Jamaat Ahmadiyyat is. I find there are a lot of things to talk about. For example, to introduce how we are different to other Muslims, who the promised Messiah ﷺ was, why he was expected to come, what his message was. What would you recommend is a good opening? And yeah, that's it.
It sounds like this person is talking about like that hand-to-hand tabligh. You walk down the street and you're like, excuse me, that type of thing. So in that case, what I would say is, firstly, increase your knowledge. Listen to Huzur sermons, right? There's plenty, Jamaat has plenty of books for you to study, right? So you build up your technical knowledge about Jamaat. But from a soft skill perspective, the first introduction to Jamaat that anyone's going to have is you, right? So you yourself will be the introduction, your behavior, your mannerisms, how you treat people, how polite you are, right? So 2 parts. 1, work on yourself, develop yourself, right? Act on what you're learning about Jamaat Ahmadiyyat. And secondly is, read some of the books that Jamaat produces. Imam Naseem Bajwa has produced a good guide to Tabligh. So I would say start there. Most importantly, make friends. You know what I mean? I used to have to, I remember I had one job, like your Sky TV, right? We call it Cablevision in New York. I remember I had to knock on people's doors to ask them if they had cable. And if they didn't, would they like to buy the package? Like cold calling. It's tough. So if that's what you mean, like that hand-to-hand tabligh, where you literally go out and you're like, hi, excuse me, then, you just have to do it. It'll build your confidence. But when you're kind and polite to people, tell them who you are. You yourself are the best introduction. And then increase your technical knowledge by reading the books of the Jamaat.
Jazakallah. So we have a hand raised from Munad al-Islam, Birmingham West, I believe. So I can unmute you. I'll ask to unmute.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
My question is, how old were you when you joined Ahmadiyyat?
I was about 28 years old.
Jazakallah. Is
So
that
that
this
was just a few years ago.
Yeah. Jazakallah Manadil. Okay, and so we have, I think we can, wrap it up here and say that this is our last question. So he's giving his salam, and he said,
Wa alaikum salam salam.
for those who are born Ahmadi, many haven't had the same spiritual experiences that new converts have. How can we also experience these spiritual blessings?
What do you mean by born Ahmadi?
So those, this is going to be me interpreting his question, but
No, I know what the person means, right? I hear this quite a lot, right? So if you mean that your parents were Ahmadi and you were born in their household, and so you just followed what you found your fathers following, right? Then that's no different, really. It just means that you got a bit of cultural pointers before I did, right? So when a person is born in a Christian household, a Muslim, a Ahmadi, a Sikh, or whatever, just means they learn little cultural bits, or they learn how to pray. They learn on Friday, they go to the mosque, Eid, both Eids, right? Put on your shoes starting with your right foot, eat with your right hand, right? That sort of thing. Don't eat pork. So you learn those bits. But in terms of you yourself choosing Ahmadiyyat, that's no different from what a convert does, except a convert has to also learn those cultural bits. So in terms of what you can do to improve your spirituality, listen to Hazur's sermons and try to put them into practice. That's the first thing. The second thing is, or I should say the first thing, in addition to listen to Hazur's khutbah, is to make your prayers as best you can and on time. Never miss a prayer. No matter if you woke up at noon and you had to make fajr, never miss a prayer. That's the first thing to increasing anyone's spirituality. Allah says, remember me and I will remember you, right? So I would say doing your best to make your 5 daily prayers, listening to Hazur's khutbahs, and trying to read some of the books of the Promised Messiah.
Jazakallah. And I guess Hazur stresses how important it is to keep up our prayers, especially as youngsters. And also you mentioned, again, there's such a difference between just being born an Ahmadi and actually finding Ahmadiyyat for yourself as well.
Not really, because a person has to do the same thing.
Yeah, so we're
how many Ahmadi, I mean, I get what you're saying, but how many Ahmadis, right? I've been to, I don't know, some 20 countries around the world. And I've met average Ahmadis. I've met Ahmadis who possibly only Ahmadis in name. And I've met some high quality Ahmadis, all of which are born Ahmadis. Now on the new convert side, I see the same thing. I see some that have just converted. Maybe they got married or, maybe they're just trying it out. I see some that are good, average. They're there. They do the bare minimum, so to speak, which is enough for anybody, right? 5 daily prayers, fasting during Ramadan, paying a zakat, paying your chand, good, solid. And then you see some extraordinary converts. So it's the same. What's the common denominator? A person's aspiration. Your own aspiration is going to determine your altitude. Like that old saying, attitude determines altitude. It's true. So whether you're a convert or whether you're a new Ahmadi or a born Ahmadi, it's your attitude towards God that's going to affect positively or negatively your degree of spirituality. Remember, even if you are born Ahmadi, you still have to choose it for yourself. I have met many Ahmadis who come from strong parents and decided to go a completely different route, in some cases outside of Ahmadiyyat. So how does that happen, right? And we all know that there's plenty of converts who have that same thing. It has to do with your attitude and your heart. That's all.
Yeah, so a lot of us, even who are in Ahmadi families, would have to make that essential conversion to, you know, to choose it for ourselves essentially as well. So yeah, Jazakallah for that aspect, looking at it from a different perspective as well. So yeah, I guess we'll wrap it up there. Before we finish, I want to say thank you to Hamza Sahib for your time. It's been absolutely amazing listening to your story, and thank you for answering all the questions that came in as well.